So, in this lecture, we're going to be talking about the second half of Chapter 11, which is looking at continuing to look at the research and the reality for women as they become middle-aged and then older than that. Okay, so this first picture is Condoleezza Rice, who became Secretary of State in 2004 at age 50. So she's a good representative of a woman who's just reaching the apex of her career in middle age. So we've already talked about the first two topics here, the social meanings of age, the images of older women. Now we're going to talk about an aging woman's body and the changes to relationships, work and achievement, and finally making a difference. Okay, so physical health for women in middle and later years. Women as a group live longer than men. They have a greater life expectancy. The caveat there is they're more likely to have chronic illness and disabilities as they age. In fact, we see that the women are more likely to have conditions that limit their activity. They're 2 to 3 times more likely once they're over 75 than men over 75 to have conditions that limit their activity. If you think in terms of heart disease, it's very interesting. The causes of death for women, the top 3 are cancer, respiratory illness, and heart disease, and number 4 being strokes. So heart disease is one of the leading causes of death for women. But because a lot of the early research on heart disease was done on men, there was a shortage of information about women's symptoms, which often differ from men's symptoms. So since 1985, heart disease for women has been heart disease as causing death has increased for women but decreased for men. And you'll see this in research shows that men are twice as likely to have life-saving bypass surgery than women with similar symptoms. So this was often attributed to cognitive biases on the part of doctors that may kick in with women and their symptoms because they think of an overweight, sedentary white male as the prototype, not a woman. So they will tend to assume the symptoms are maybe due to more to other reasons like anxiety or other conditions that are not cardiac conditions. So there may be there have been a lot of misdiagnoses when they were really cardiac problems, but they were initially misdiagnosed as having panic disorders or menopausal symptoms or as having hypochondria. So we do see that midlife and older women more likely live with chronic illnesses like arthritis and diabetes. And like I mentioned, they are 2 to 3 times more likely to have conditions that limit their activity than men are once they get over age 75, which has effects on their self-identity and forces them to have a continual focus on their bodies. We also see differences in terms of ethnicity. Women who are of Hispanic origin and African American women tend to have poorer health than European American women, and are more likely to die from diseases that could be treated and managed with access to good health care. So here again, we see that socioeconomic status is the single most important predictor of health in old age. And we see this link of poverty and poor health. Because poverty is connected to many physiological and psychological stressors like unemployment, crowding, poor diets, unsanitary living conditions, pollution, and violence, right? An example of this would be the poverty amongst Native Americans. Native Americans' rates of serious chronic illness is 600% higher than the rest of the population. And as mentioned, poor people are much less likely to get consistent, good care, medical care for chronic illness, right? So let's talk about menopause. What is menopause? Menopause is when women stop having menstrual cycles and monthly periods, and this can occur anytime between the ages of 40 and 60. The average is around the age of 50. Menopause can give women hot flashes. It's something that occurs over several years. It's not a quick thing. Hot flashes are brief episodes of suddenly increased heart rate, warmth, and sweating, but these do decline over time. There are other physical symptoms of menopause. There could be changes in terms of the dryness of the vagina, which may require the use of lubricants during sex. But I don't think it's not a very big deal. Physical signs of menopause are not universal. Some women rarely have them. It is natural. Menopause is natural, but it is often treated like an illness, and we call this the medicalization of menopause. In terms of the psychological experiences of menopause, there's been a long history of attributing women's psychological distress to their reproductive system, right? We see that in the 1860s, it was said, a lot of clinicians said that women had craziness and depression that was called involutional melancholia when they were going through menopause and postmenopausal, and this was part of this whole myth that women's reproductive systems made them unbalanced and mentally unstable, right? There is still a belief that women become depressed, moody, irritable, and hypersensitive at menopause, and this myth is still prevalent among healthcare providers and women themselves. But we actually see that depression is not a normal part of menopause. Menopause may be linked with short-term moodiness and irritability in some women. The moodiness may be in part due to hormonal changes, but partly due to just the associated physical changes and the expectations that are created by stereotypes. Women expect to be moody and feel depressed, and so they do during menopause. Studies do show, though, that the women are often relieved that they are no longer you need to use birth control, and they no longer have to worry about becoming pregnant. Okay. Studies also show that exercise and fitness are the important factors in order to make menopause transition smooth, that being physically active is linked to higher feelings of self-worth, fewer physical symptoms, and in general a better quality of life for women going through menopause. In the middle of the 20th century, or more like probably like the 1960s, 70s, ERT, estrogen replacement therapy, and HRT, hormone replacement therapy, became very big, became very important, and there was a lot of claims made about HRT and ERT, claims that had not really yet been supported by research, but there was all these claims out there that this hormone replacement therapy could prevent osteoporosis, prevent heart disease, prevent types of cancer, help with cognition and appearance. And research, when it was done later, disproved basically all of these claims. Okay, in fact, research showed that there are a lot of problems with using HRT and ERT. In fact, they are associated with a lot of these things that they thought to be preventative of. HRT was associated with a slightly increased risk of breast cancer, heart attack, and stroke, and was found in 2008. ERT was linked to an increased risk of stroke and had no effect on preventing heart disease. Both HRT and ERT were linked to increased cognitive impairment, not reduced cognitive impairment. And they also found that they were also linked to increased dementia. So today we know that HRT really may only have benefits for those who have severe menopausal symptoms, which are women who are few and far between. And they may prevent osteoporosis in these high-risk women. Okay, but in general, estrogen replacement therapy and hormone replacement therapy have been disproved as being effective in a lot of these medical issues, and actually of only increasing women's risks. So we think about constructing our bodies and objectifying our bodies to make ourselves look a certain way, as women tend to do. A lot of women, older women, view their bodies as laborious projects, and where they're always trying to figure out how to make themselves look younger. And we see this ever increasing in the Western world, that we're trying to look younger and younger, and this is aided by aggressive marketing of anti-aging products. Women are constantly dyeing their hair. They're constantly looking for the latest and the greatest way to reduce their wrinkles. We also see this in the fact that in 2015, there were 16 million cosmetic procedures done by plastic surgeons, and 92% of these procedures were done on women. These were breast lifts, tummy tucks, face lifts. So a lot of cosmetic surgery out there. Both men and women are encouraged to disguise signs of aging. For men, it's more along the lines of Viagra and trying to show that they are still sexually viable. And we also see that feminists are very divided on these issues. And some feminists say that it's giving into self-objectification to do all this work to attempt to look younger. And others say that it's a rational choice given the evidence of ageism, given the evidence of the discrimination against older people. So there's a division there. Well, some women will just respond to the pressure to maintain a youthful appearance by just opting out. And what does that mean? Well, it means that they'll decide that they're not so concerned about what people think about the way they look. They will do whatever they feel they need to do in order to be comfortable. They wear relaxed clothes and comfy shoes, and they won't really participate in that whole game of objectification and looking a certain way to disguise their age. So exercise and fitness. This is one of the most important factors in maintaining good health for women in the second half of life. Exercise helps prevent loss of muscle tone, which contributes to falls and broken bones when you lose muscle tone. Exercise also strengthens the immune system. It helps you think clearer. improves memory, even improves skin tone. Older women often wrongly think they get enough exercise by doing housework or by walking in terms of their daily activities, but that's not considered really enough exercise. And strength training can reverse muscle loss at any age. So there's also a lot of psychological benefits of exercise. Interestingly enough, despite all these benefits, women tend to exercise less than men, and the amount of exercise they get decreases as they age. And part of this is due to the fact that women are not encouraged as often as men are to exercise, and they have more of that unpaid work to do, whereas men have more leisure time available for exercise. So when we talk in terms specifically about sexuality in middle and later life, we know that society definitely, especially in Western societies, that there's definitely a disdain or a lack of understanding of sexuality for women in their middle and later years. In fact, a mini-skirted older woman would be considered deviant, right, for daring to appear sexually past her reproductive years or after menopause. So this is different than for men. There are plenty of approving jokes about Viagra, but there's an immense cultural negativity about the sexuality of older women. Now, I think this is shifting some, because we do see some of this, some jokes now about cougars, or older women when they're single, aggressively pursuing younger men for casual sex. This whole notion of a cougar, which is sort of a new thing. So maybe that shows that the stereotypes about sexuality in older women are changing. So the reality, though, for older women is that one of the biggest factors influencing how active they are sexually is the lack of partners. So women, they outlive men, and then there are a lot more women than there are men starting at age 60. In fact, by the time women reach the age of 85, there are twice as many women as there are men at the age of 85. But interestingly enough, it's not true that older people are not interested in and take pleasure in sexual activity. In fact, older people express continued interest in and pleasure in sexual activity, and they'll remain sexually active into their 70s and 80s if they're in good health. In fact, particular research has found that older people in their 70s and 80s will still report a regular sex life with sex once a week. And so the sexual desire and the satisfaction is still there in old age. Medical and behavioral studies show many older people desire and are capable of enjoying sexual intimacy into old age. We see, if you look at online dating qualitative studies, these studies have found differences in the types of relationships that are often desired by older women and older men. Older men want committed relationships, whereas older women want intimate companions. So this reflects an idea that women, as the caregivers, don't want to be caregivers anymore when they are back in the online dating world. And we see this in examples such as women who have buried husbands, maybe more than one husband, and don't no longer want to be caretakers. If we look at older lesbians, even though there's very little research on sexuality amongst older lesbians, a British study found that 60% of women were in relationships, and half of those were living with their partners. And another online survey looking at 450 lesbians in the U.S. whose median age was 62, showed that 62% were in a relationship, and most of those were lifetime partnerships. In terms of relationships, in terms of friends and family, older women tend to be involved in networks of friends and family compared to older men in the same age group, and report feeling closer to their friends. The women do than the men. If you look at studies of lesbian and bisexual women in their 60s and older, their friends are named as the very important source of support for virtually all of those participants in those studies. We also see that among African American women, we see a greater involvement with family than in white European American women. African American women tend to be more in closer touch with their adult children. They're more frequently in contact with them. They're more involved with their grandchildren. And interestingly enough, older adults, contrary to stereotype, they like technology, and they use it often to stay in touch with family and friends. And research has shown that those who use technologies, such as Facebook and cell phones, those that use these technologies report less loneliness and depression and report better well-being in general. Okay. Becoming a grandmother is a positive image of older women and can be a great source of meaning for an older woman, giving her a meaningful and important place and role. Grandmothers are often relied upon for advice. Some grandmothers even feel the need to set limits because they understand parenting, and they've done it before, so they understand they have to set expectations in order not to get overused. There are differences in terms of ethnicity, in terms of grandmothers' roles. Among Native American families, the grandmother is often the center of the family and the one who holds it all together. In African American families, often the grandmother is involved in grandchildren's daily lives. For example, Michelle Obama's mom lived in the White House to help care for the Obama's children during the Michelle Obama and Barack Obama's time in the White House. So let's talk about relationships. Some relationships continue for women as they enter middle and older ages. Some relationships end. Grandparents, obviously those relationships continue. In fact, a lot of grandparents end up taking the primary responsibility for their grandchildren on. This may be due to divorce or single mothers who need to work or go to school. There's also grandparents who end up caring for the grandchildren because of HIV, AIDS, or drug epidemics in their communities. But there are a lot of grandchildren living in grandparent-headed households. And in those grandparent-headed households, we have several that are grandmother-only or grandmother-alone households. And over 57% of those are considered poor. They do not have much money. So women in this situation find themselves having multiple stressors that detract from their physical health, their emotional well-being, and their financial security, because they are handling parent duties of grandchildren and they don't have income. So if we think about women as caregivers in general, not just as grandmothers, but in general, there's a lot of caring that goes on that's expected of women. A lot of caring for elderly parents. Almost 17% of people over age 65 need some sort of long-term help from others because they have some form of disability. So a great majority of caregivers to these people over age 65 are women, okay? We also have women that are caring for a spouse. Our society assumes that old women will be responsible for their even older husbands, and caring for an older spouse, for an elderly spouse, can be very heartbreaking and difficult to do long term. We do find that in the research we see that lesbian couples have similar experiences in terms of being caregivers as heterosexual couples, but they may also have to cope with having other relatives having heterosexist attitudes and bias against them that adds to their stress. So if you think about the costs and the rewards of this caregiving, we know that a lot of women are affected by giving out this elder care simply in terms of their cost to their careers. 33% of women caregivers had to cut back on their hours at their paid jobs. 29% passed up opportunities for advancement because they didn't have the time available, they felt, due to their caregiving. 22% took took leaves to care for others in terms of elder care. 13% took early retirement to care for their elders. So there's definitely impacts on careers and the amount of money earned for caregivers. And this also affects Social Security and retirement benefits when they themselves get old. And of no surprise to anyone, it is most often the daughter who is perceived as the suitable one to be the caregiver, or she may be the only one who offers as well. So why do women do more care work? Well, it's expected of them, and it's also something that they want to do sometimes. Some women are getting a lot of satisfaction from fulfilling a big responsibility, which it is a big responsibility to care for others, especially family members. They might be following religious teachings. They might feel it's a form of expressing their love and returning their care that they received from their parents in the past. Research definitely shows that personality makes little difference in who gets assigned to do care work. And most or over half of female caregivers keep on working despite their caregiving responsibilities, which research showed in 2003. So essentially, care work by women is not really just a free choice. The responsibility for caring for others is structured by our gender-based division of labor in our families. It's part of the devaluation of unpaid work. It's not really seen as real work, and the reluctance of society to provide social services for those in need also comes into play. Nearly half of all women in the U.S. over the age of 65 are widows. So loss of a life partner is very, very common once you reach the age of 65. In fact, 27% of people grieving for the loss of a partner seem to be experiencing symptoms of PTSD. So loss of a partner is very, very traumatic. And these symptoms will decline over time, but they never disappear entirely. Women do seem to cope better with the loss of a spouse than men. And this may be because women are widowed younger than men are, oftentimes because women tend to live longer or have a longer life expectancy than men. Little is known about partner loss in lesbian couples. Coping with the loss of a lesbian partner may be made more difficult by heterosexism. Lesbian life partners may experience more legal, financial, or social obstacles because of having been in a lesbian relationship long term. So hopefully that maybe is changing a little with legalization of same-sex marriages. Okay, so let's talk about work and achievement for women in midlife and in their and beyond. So we do know that for working women, studies have shown that college-educated working women typically have a lot of confidence, achievement, and happiness in their midlife compared with other age groups. Because at that point in their lives, a lot of working women have fewer childcare responsibilities. They may have better health because they're no longer dealing with childbearing, and they may have a higher income because they've reached a higher level in their career. So this may account for why, compared with their other age groups, women in their early 50s tend to have the highest life satisfaction. This also may be partly explained by the fact that some women see midlife as a chance to explore new career directions, or they may see it as a chance to go back to school and finish that degree that they had stopped working on due to getting married and having children. For other women, though, divorce may be the catalyst that helps them forge ahead with a new path in life when they're in their middle years. Okay? Now, when we think in terms of the patterns, though, of change midlife, that's going to vary depending on the socioeconomic class of the woman. Women who are not very wealthy, maybe who are working class or poor, they're going to often experience greater health problems at a younger age than more advantaged women are. Because they don't have as great access to consistent, high quality health care. Some of these women may have more physically demanding jobs, and they may see slowing down as a major midlife goal as opposed to speeding up. For some, though, education is going to become an important means of redefining themselves. As we mentioned, they may be getting beyond needing to provide a lot of child care and pay for children's expenses, so they may be able to go back to school and finish degrees, perhaps that they had started younger. In terms of retirement, traditional male models of retirement are poor fits for women, doesn't describe women's experiences with retirement. Many low-income women have to keep working as long as they possibly can to make ends meet, and may work off the books without earning health benefits or pensions. When they retire from paid work, their total workload may not change because of all the unpaid work that they do. And we see this also play out for divorced or never married women because they cannot afford to retire as early as married women. So we know that they just don't have as much income. There's very little research on retirement among gay and lesbian individuals or couples. We do know that lesbian couples may have a lower average income before retirement than gay male heterosexuals, married or heterosexual cohabitating couples. So if we think in terms of poverty in later life for women, we do know that about 2/3 of all poor older adults in the U.S. are women, and the majority of these are ethnic minority women. Okay, and this poverty that we see is basically reflecting an accumulation of a lifetime of gender-linked inequities in the workplace. So women in old age have earned less than men for their same work and are far less likely to have pensions. So they've also probably taken time out from paid work to take care of their children. And every year that a woman works taking care of her children, her spouse, or her elderly family members, a zero is entered into her Social Security account unless she has done over 35 years of paid work. So Cruikshank 2003 said defining an older woman's caregiving years as 0 years is blatant gender discrimination. Women are penalized for doing the work society expects of them, right? Okay. So we do see that older married women are better off than single or widowed women, again, because older married women are able to rely on their partner's economic resources. Although An older middle-class woman who's relying on her husband's retirement plan may slip into poverty as she ages because savings may be depleted during his final illness, and his pension may end with his death, and her Social Security benefits greatly drop. Okay? So, a woman's social class during her earning years makes a huge difference in the odds that she will be poor in her old age. So, how will future cohorts of women escape poverty in old age? Well, it's not going to happen unless there's big changes made in the way that we pay women in our country. The gap in resources reflects the fact that women's lifetime earnings are still much lower than men's. So if we think in terms of how women can make a difference for themselves in terms of their old age, when they attain old age, we do see efforts made in terms of elder activism. Because older people are an increasingly larger portion of the population, their political clout is growing. And we also see this because the baby boomers, that cohort group, has reached retirement age. And baby boomers are more likely to be activists, which is good in terms of changing social programs for elders. Some of the current midlife women are envisioning new paths for themselves, as we've discussed. Some women are choosing to live collectively with other women for companionship, mutual support, and economic benefits. There is interest in this option growing. We know that. We don't know any official statistics yet on this. But I have heard quite a bit about this, and you may have heard as well of living arrangements that people are coming up with, such as what's called adopting grandparents, so that older people can actually join non-relatives and be a grandparent in terms of helping out with kids and stuff, in exchange for having a roof over their heads, and a reduction in the cost of living for them. Resisting ageism is also another way that people can speak up against discrimination for the elderly or for older people. Stereotypes that seem positive can be harmful, and resisting ageism is something that people of all ages can do.